Hi guys, it's Saturday today. I've done all of my morning jobs, done all of my baking and everything else. So I've now got time finally, and I've been trying to get around to this for the last few days, to harvest some elderflowers, and we're going to make some elderflower cordial today. So that's not the only thing you can do with elderflowers. We'll talk about some of the other things you can do with them as well. But we're going to start, we're heading up now to the elder trees that we have growing on our property, and we're going to talk a little bit about identification first, then we're going to harvest them, and then we're going to go in and make the cordial. I'll bring you with me through the whole process. Now, elder is a really important tree to the forager. We forage from it 3 times throughout the year. The first time is now, which is sort of late spring, early summer, and that's for the elderflowers. And then we come back to it and forage from it again, the elderberries, at the other end of summer. And then finally, we can come back to it any time of the year, but for me personally, particularly in right in the depths of winter, sort of through January and February, even when there's snow on the ground, it's one of the trees that is a host for a really common mushroom, the wood ear mushroom. So like I say, from a forager's point of view, it's a really important plant. We forage from it 3 times in a year. Now, it's also an incredibly common plant, and it grows in hedgerows all around the country, but also in other parts of the world. I know that it's really prevalent in North America, and I think it actually grows the world over. So you can actually spot elderflowers from a fair distance because they're like a creamy colour. They're not quite white. A lot of the shrubs and hedgerows that have really, these clusters of flowers similar to the elder, they tend to be whiter, crisper, whereas these guys, like I say, from a distance, they really do stand out as having a yellowy, creamy type colouring to them. So yeah, one of the other identifiers, and this really is more helpful on your 2nd, 3rd and 4th forage for elderflower, is the smell. And to me, they just smell really deliciously summery. It's a really difficult smell to describe, but quite floral and just really pleasant. That's our first elder plant, our elder tree down there. But I've got another one, which is, I think, growing a little bit more bushy, closer to the ground, which is probably a little bit more typical of how you might find them if you're out on country lanes. And that's just up this track here. So we're going to go and check that one out. Okay, so here we go, and hopefully you can see that sort of creamy tinge to the colour of the flowers, but let's have a look at them a little bit closer. Here's a good set. So if you look, they're usually in groups of 5, but there are occasionally 4 petals for each individual flower, and quite distinctly, and what gives them that off-white tinge, you see there's little sort of yellow, I don't know what you call it, but little yellow bits growing out in between each petal. So that's something that is really useful when you're identifying. When it comes to the actual tree itself, because a lot of the time when we're foraging for elder, it's not in flower. So it's got these leaves in groups of 5. You've got 2 sets of 2 opposite each other, and then 1 terminal leaf at the end of the leaf stem, and that goes right through the plant, look, as you can see. And then finally, because when we forage for it in winter, quite often there are no leaves either, but it's got really distinctive bark. Those little gnarly knots, it's really quite distinctive. And the thing is with elder is it's quite a brittle tree. It's a fast growing but brittle tree. So generally speaking, where you've got a biggish tree like this one here, you come along in the winter and there will be broken bits and dying and dead parts of the tree on the ground. And those are the parts that will be the host for the wood ear mushroom that we forage for. So I'm going to collect some of this now. I'm going to fill up a bag and take this in to make some cordial, which is the simplest thing in the world. Before we do, a quick note on safety. So when you're foraging elder, even when you're foraging elderberries, which we're going to eat, it's worth noting that every single part of the elder tree is mildly toxic. It's actually slightly poisonous, but that's when it's raw, with the elderberry and the flowers, cooking them makes them perfectly safe. But you shouldn't really, I mean, I've heard lots and lots of anecdotal stories of people feeding a few berries to their kids or nibbling berries as a snack while they're out picking with no ill effects. I obviously am not going to suggest you do that, but, you know, it's worth noting we're not talking about a deadly poisonous plant that's going to kill you if you eat a tiny part of it. But, you know, it is worth noting that the whole plant is mildly toxic when raw. So just bear that in mind. Right, now I'm going to get picking. Okay, so I've harvested and I counted them, 65 flower heads, which I've got in my bag here, and that's going to make about 1.5 litres of cordial. So I'm really happy that I've got all that I need. There's just a couple of other tips, sort of foraging tips if you like, for actually harvesting. So the first thing to be aware of is if you are going to be coming back to the same plant and you also want to get elderberries from that same plant, you'll need to make sure that you don't harvest all the flowers, because it's the pollinated flowers which will then turn into elderberries. If you've got one plant in your garden and you're not going, you know, out of your garden to go foraging, and you want to make elderflower cordial, but you also want to make elderberry jam or something later in the season, then, you know, you'll have to make sure that you don't take them all. Second thing, and I've come back to this first plant to show you, is just be aware of the life cycle of the flower. So, you know, this is before the flowers have come out, and then obviously these have come out, and then this is afterwards. So this guy has already flowered, hopefully been pollinated, and will start to form berries. Now you want to get the flowers when they're really quite young and fresh like this. That's going to give you the sweetest flavour, rather than, I'm just trying to find one that's kind of going over. So here you go, look, I wouldn't bother harvesting that one. We leave that one alone. So I'm quite picky. We've got plenty of choice, and generally speaking you will have, because it's such an abundant plant and it's an abundant flower on the plant. So you should have quite a lot of choice and be able to pick the more choice flower heads. We're going to take these into the kitchen now and start making our elderflower cordial. Okay, so here we are. We've got all of our elderflowers here. Now, all of the recipes that I've kind of seen online and used and played with, they all basically iterate around a theme. There's only 3 other ingredients that you're really going to be asked to use when you're making elderflower cordial, whichever recipe you use. I'm going to share my recipe with you in a second, but before we get there, I just want to talk about the general rules. So I've seen on some websites, including the BBC food website, which is a really good website. All of the recipes on there are fantastic. I've used their recipes quite often for different things. Well, they recommend, from memory, I think it's something like 2.5 kilograms of sugar for 1.5 litres of water. So that's really quite extreme. What we're going to be using, 1.5 kilograms of sugar for 2 litres of water. So we're going to actually use more water and less sugar. On the River Cottage website, I think it's something like 1.5 kilograms of sugar, like we're using, with 1.5 litres of water. So we're using more water than them. So we're using less sugar to water than most recipes you'll find. But I think you'll see, you know, it's quite a lot of sugar however you spin it. So that's the first thing to say. The other thing is that most recipes are going to call for some kind of lemon-based product or citric acid, or a combination of the two. Now, the lemon juice and lemon zest and stuff like that, it definitely adds something to the flavour. That little citrus cut, that acidic cut that cuts through the sweetness of the cordial is definitely of benefit. And if you're asked to use citric acid, then, you know, it's going to perform the same job. But in addition, it's going to have some preservative qualities, as is all the sugar. Well, I'm not going to be using any lemon-based product. So instead of using lemon juice, we're actually going to be using a rhubarb juice reduction. And you've probably seen me make it, and we've made it, and if you're interested, we have used it on things like pancakes, and I actually prefer it to lemon juice. It's absolutely fantastic. So here it is. We make this with just rhubarb, and I will link to that video in the description if you're interested, because I'm trying to be as self-sufficient as possible, and the only thing going in here that we haven't produced ourselves is the sugar. Now, it should be noted that, of course, we could substitute that out for honey, but we're not producing enough of our own honey yet to be doing that. Hopefully next year that will change. But in terms of lemon juice, you know, we're basically completely away from using lemon juice now, and we're just using this, which, as I said, is made from rhubarbs, which we have in abundance. Like I say, this is about 2 litres of water going in, and 1.5 kilograms of sugar, just regular white granulated sugar. And we're just going to stir that until it all dissolves while the temperature's rising. Now, while your water is coming up to temperature, you can rinse off your elderflowers. You just want to put them in a colander and just rinse them off. That's going to get rid of most of the bugs and bits and bobs on them that you might not want. Now, again, while it's coming up to temperature, I'm going to add our Rhubarb Reduction. Now, this is malic acid as opposed to citric acid. That's the acid that is predominant in rhubarb, and it performs an extremely similar function. It's a slightly different flavour profile to lemon juice, but that doesn't bother me at all. In my opinion, it's just as nice. And I'm going to put the equivalent of if I'd squeezed maybe 2 or 3 lemons. And like I say, literally all we're trying to do now is just get to the point where all the sugars have dissolved. And I think we're pretty much there now, so we're going to keep that on the heat and then add the flowers while bringing it up to an actual boil. Look at that, barely fit in the pot. You're going to need quite a big pot. So the other thing to say while we're here is that, again, most recipes, like the ones I've been talking about, they might call for 25 flower heads or 35 flower heads, and we've used double that amount. The reason being, I want the flavour to be really strong of elderflower and not, you know, not need to have too much cordial to get that flavour in there, because for me, it's a lot about the sugar content, and I don't want to have to be consuming that much refined sugar if we can avoid it. So, you know, when you think about cordials, this is going to make probably 3 of these, roughly, full of cordial. So if you think about it, that's going to make quite a lot of portions, because you only have a small amount, and then you top it off with, well, whatever you fancy, really. Water, or sparkling water, or lemonade. Yeah, it's just a fantastic cordial. You could also use it to drizzle over things like fruit salads. So we're literally just waiting for that to come to the boil now, and we're going to boil it for about 10 minutes. And after that, we're just going to let it steep. Another quick tip, you see this big stalk here? I'm actually going to remove that. If you do find that you've got some big stalks like this, I think it does pay to remove them, because the flavour can get a bit stalky. It's really difficult to describe what I mean by that, but if you've ever made elderflower cordial and you've, you know, had too much stem in it, then you'll know exactly what I mean. Okay, that's been boiling for about 10 minutes now. So we'll turn the heat off, pop the lid on, and we'll just leave that now to steep for anything between 12 and 24 hours. We're probably going to leave it somewhere in the middle, about 18, because it's in the afternoon now, and we'll probably get to this tomorrow morning to decant it. It's a 24-hour long process, but there's only about 20 minutes worth of work involved in it. So we'll let that steep, and we'll meet up again tomorrow. Okay, so it's the following morning now, and we've got our cordial, which has been steeping overnight, and all we're going to do now is we're going to sieve it into a container, use whatever you like, obviously, and then we're going to decant it into some bottles. And depending on what animals you've got and how fussy they are, this can become animal feed or compost. So we've now got about 3 litres of elderflower cordial, so a little bit more than I anticipated yesterday. I think I neglected to compensate volume wise for the amount of sugar actually that took up volume. So we're going to bottle this up now in some sterilised bottles. Because this has in it just naturally sugars and yeasts, if I left this at room temperature it would start to ferment And it will actually do that in the fridge very, very slowly, but not in the time frames that concern us because we'll have used it by then. So this will keep in the fridge for a good couple of weeks, and it will keep in the freezer, well, do your own research, but I would suggest that it would keep in the freezer pretty much indefinitely because the levels of sugar in here are going to act as a preservative as well. It's just got, in the freezer, it's got so much working for it insofar as preservation wise. We've used it from in the freezer for, well, we've taken it out of the freezer and used it well after 9 months. So that's 3, and we've got a little bit left in there. So we'll just do a smaller bottle. So we'll put this one in the fridge and the other 3 in the freezer. So there you go, elderflower cordial. It couldn't be simpler. Smells delicious, tastes delicious. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. So thanks for watching, guys. Please make sure you press that like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to know your recipes. I'd love to know if you've ever made this before or if this is your first attempt. And I'd also love to know how it goes. So please do let me know. So come and check out the Self-Sufficient Hub podcast as well. Just search Self-Sufficient Hub in your podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support us more directly, then please check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Self-Sufficient Hub. Thanks everyone, speak to you soon. Cheers. And you can see the flowers, you can actually spot them. I'm just going to give some bread to our pigs because they're not going to shut up otherwise. Come and check out the Self-Sufficient Hub podcasts. Just Google Self-Sufficient Hub. No, you don't Google it. Why would you Google it? It's a podcast.
So search it in your podcast app.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.